My name was printed in gold on the invitation, shiny, elegant, and utterly unwanted. The envelope had arrived in a cream-colored courier pouch heavier than expected. I had been sipping lukewarm coffee watching the gray sky hang over Philadelphia like a silent judgment when I noticed it on the doormat. No return address, just my name in perfect cursive. Inside thick cardstock gold foil pressed floral edges. Classy. Pretentious. And there at the center, under soft lighting in a mock-up of a ballroom stage, you are cordially invited to the joint celebration of Claire Madison's wedding and Sienna Madison Klein's 5th wedding anniversary. I reread it. Then I reread it again. I flipped the card over, half expecting a punchline. Joint my wedding. I hadn't agreed to any of this. I hadn't even picked a dress yet. The RSVP section was pre-filled. Date May 14, 2023. Venue Rosewood Estate. Guests 120 confirmed. Somehow I was getting married in 2 months. To Daniel, yes. But not in the way we'd planned. Not at the place we discussed. Not with our guest list. And certainly not sharing the spotlight with Sienna and whatever Instagrammable circus she was planning. I called my mother. She answered cheerfully, as if she'd been expecting the call. Darling, you got the invitation, isn't it stunning? I hired a boutique printer in New York. They do all the governor's events. What is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. A celebration, she said. Of love, of course. Sienna's 5th anniversary is such a milestone, and your wedding, well, it just made sense to bring the family together. You merged our events. Well, with the economy these days, it seemed wise. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. There was no trace of apology, just gentle insistence, practice charm sugar over poison. You never asked me, I said. Your family, Claire. We don't need to ask. It's all for the same goal. That was when I noticed the invoice paper tucked behind the invitation. Ivory-colored, discreet. A single figure at the bottom in bold print, $63.82 19. Due under Claire Madison. I couldn't breathe for a second. I sat down slowly, fingers cold despite the radiator buzzing in the corner. The invoice listed everything: venue deposit, catering estimate, custom decor, private fireworks. Sienna's stylist was included. So was her videographer, her imported florist. Nothing on it resembled what Daniel and I had wanted. I dialed her again. She picked up faster this time. Sweetheart, I know it looks like a lot, but think of it as a shared investment. And honestly, between you and Sienna, you're in a more stable place. She's had a rough patch lately with Trent's job, and you used my name on this bill. Well, we needed someone credible to secure the deposit. You used my name without asking. She hesitated. A beat. Then with the same velvet tone. We're family. It's the same thing. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. Daniel came home an hour later to find me cross-legged on the floor surrounded by papers. Credit card statements, email, confirmations, documents I hadn't looked at in months. I couldn't explain what I was looking for, only that I had to find it. He knelt beside me. Talk to me. They've been using my name, I said. My accounts. My credit. Maybe for longer than I realized. His jaw tensed. Claire, I signed nothing, I whispered. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts kept circling the same phrase. What else have they done under my name? The next morning, I opened the contract again. The formal agreement tied to the venue. There at the bottom was a signature in black ink, Claire Madison. Slanted just slightly forward, the C curling like a ribbon. It was my signature. Down to the extra loop in the R. Identical. But I never signed it. I learned how to make myself small in a family full of noise. It's why they never noticed when I started keeping secrets. In the Madison household, noise was currency. Sienna cried loudest, so she always got what she wanted. My mother turned the volume up when she wanted control, laughter too shrill, praise too sharp, scolding like glass. I learned early that being quiet didn't mean being invisible, it meant being useful. The more I disappeared into responsibility, the more they relied on me to clean up the messes. I was 16, the first time I felt something had been taken from me. It started with a screaming match. Sienna, then, 19, standing in the hallway with mascara streaks down her cheeks, yelling about how no one understood her. She wanted to leave college. She hated her roommate. She needed therapy. And fashion school. In Milan or Paris. Wherever it was not boring. I had been curled up in the corner of the living room, headphones on, pretending not to hear. But I heard everything. The next day, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table with a smile. "You're still interested in applying to UPenn, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Well, your father and I were thinking, since you're so smart and reliable, you might get a scholarship. So we've decided to reallocate some of the college fund for Sienna's well-being. Just for now. Family first. Right, I didn't say no. I didn't ask how much. I didn't know I had a choice." Now, years later, sitting at my desk in the dim light of my apartment, that same sinking feeling returned as I scrolled through my bank's online statements. Daniel had gone to bed an hour ago. I could hear the low hum of the fan from the bedroom, the occasional creak of the floor above us. Outside, the city was quiet. But my mind was loud. The files were a mess. So many automatic payments. Some were clearly mine, utility subscriptions, rent. But others a monthly transfer labeled Right Mortgage Associates. 147.35 or. It had been going out for over 4 years. I opened a second tab, started digging. Right Mortgage handled property loans in Cherry Hill. Sienna lived in Cherry Hill. With Thomas. I stared at the screen, not blinking. 4 years. That's over $55,000. I pulled out a notebook and began listing every suspicious transaction I could find. A tax return that never hit my account. A credit inquiry I didn't remember approving. A joint account opened in 2020 with my name and an unfamiliar cosigner. I opened a drawer and dug out my old files, scanned copies of documents I had signed years ago, back when I still believed my mother's word was truth. And there it was. Power of attorney. I remembered the moment clearly now. I had just turned 19. My mother told me it was a routine form so she could help manage things while I was in college. I was rushing between classes, worried about my final in organic chemistry. I signed it without reading past the first paragraph. She had access to everything. And she had used it. Daniel came out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes, hair mussed. "You're still up?" he asked gently. "Yeah." He walked over and looked at my screen. I expected him to ask questions, but instead he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Want help?" I nodded, unable to speak. We worked side by side for the next hour. Him cross-referencing names and account numbers. Me pulling up old emails and letters I'd ignored. It was methodical, like peeling paint from a wall I didn't realize was rotting. At one point, Daniel paused. He stared at the screen in front of him, then turned to me slowly. "Claire," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just about your wedding. This has been going on for years. In my family, dinner tables weren't for meals. They were battlefields covered in wine glasses and polite threats. Eleanor had outdone herself as usual. The table was set with cream linens and gold-rimmed china. Tall candles flickered in crystal holders. The roast chicken was arranged in precise slices on a silver platter flanked by tiny sprigs of rosemary that no one would eat. Every chair had been assigned. Every plate was turned just so. And everything, every goddamn thing was meant to impress. I sat between Daniel and James. Across from me were Sienna and Thomas, her husband smug in a navy blazer. Eleanor floated at the head of the table, refilling glasses and commenting on the wine's cheeky finish. Daniel smiled politely. I chewed slowly, silently. "Only 6 weeks now," Eleanor beamed. "Can you believe it? All the vendors are confirmed. The band is flying in from LA. Sienna leaned forward. And the custom cake. 3 tiers, almond cream, and champagne sponge. It's going to look so perfect next to our anniversary photos. I forced a swallow. And Claire Eleanor added, turning to me with a maternal smile practiced over decades. Your dress fitting is next Thursday. I told Elise to prepare something timeless, none of that bohemian silliness. You deserve elegance. Thomas chuckled. At least she gets a wedding. Some of us had to settle for courthouse vows and frozen lasagna. Sienna swatted his arm playfully. Oh, please, no one's looking at you anyway. Isn't that the truth? Eleanor said, topping off Sienna's wine. But Claire, sweetheart, your moment is coming. You've always been so understated. This celebration will bring you into the light. Daniel's hand brushed mine under the table, a quiet squeeze. I focused on my fork. Sienna, I said, keeping my voice level. Do you know how much the celebration costs? She blinked, then smiled like a cat. I mean, I haven't seen the final bill. That's your department, right? You've always been the spreadsheet queen. Eleanor laughed. Let's not get into numbers tonight. This is about love, not ledgers. And Claire has always been so generous. I set my fork down. Generosity requires consent, I said. Silence. Just the soft clink of a wine glass as James adjusted his grip. Darling, Eleanor began. We're not asking you to carry it alone. We just needed someone reliable on the paperwork. You know how flaky Sienna can be with signatures. Sienna rolled her eyes. Guilty. You forged my name. There it was. I said it without raising my voice. I didn't need to. The words landed like a dropped knife. Eleanor tilted her head, her smile frozen in place. Claire. You filled out a contract under my name. You used a signature I didn't give. That's not reliability. That's fraud. Thomas cleared his throat. Okay, well, let's maybe not go full courtroom over dinner. I'm not joking. James exhaled through his nose, the first sound he'd made in an hour. Eleanor reached for my hand across the table. Sweetheart, it's all within the family. No one's trying to hurt you. Daniel's voice was low, directed only to me. We can leave. You don't have to do this here. But I shook my head. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I stood. My napkin slid to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. I never agreed to this, I said clearly. You forged my name. Sienna made a noise that might have been a laugh. Oh, come on, Claire. Drama doesn't suit you. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest. James put down his glass slowly, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. Enough, he said, voice deeper than I remembered. Not here. I looked him dead in the eye. Then when? Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. Money has a scent, and in my family it always smells like guilt and vintage perfume. It was nearly midnight. My apartment looked like a crime scene if the crime was white-collar and committed with a fountain pen. Receipts were stacked on the coffee table. Legal pads, tax filings, manila folders bloomed like weeds across the floor. Daniel sat beside me on the carpet cross-legged and focused the bluish light from his laptop, painting shadows across his face. I scrolled through my inbox for the 4th time that hour. Search terms: Rosewood Events, invoice payment authorization. Each email thread ended in some vague affirmation from my mother's address. Never mine. Found it? Daniel said quietly, tilting his screen toward me. A contract dated March 2nd. Rosewood Event Management. Total projected cost $63,082.19. Client Claire Madison. Signature Claire Madison. Except I hadn't signed it. We'd already been through that. What's the timestamp? I asked. Signed digitally, IP address logged to your mother's house. I blinked. Can you trace that? Already did. Her name isn't on the document anywhere. Just yours. The deeper we dug, the more perfectly she'd covered her tracks. Every financial thread tied back to me. Nothing official linked her to the bill, not the deposit, not the email confirmations, not even the event questionnaire that mentioned joint celebration. Just one name over and over, mine. I clicked open a saved audio file. Daniel had found it on the venue's voicemail archive after hours of requesting quality assurance recordings. The voice was unmistakable. "Yes, this is Claire Madison," she said in that soft performative tone she used when she wanted to sound younger. "Just confirming the catering menu for May 14th. Yes, yes, the champagne fountain stays. Sienna's allergic to shellfish, please no scallops." She didn't even try to disguise herself. I paused the clip halfway through. My hands were shaking. "She's been impersonating me," I said. Daniel nodded grimly. "And if the event company never required ID, they wouldn't know." I picked up the folder with my name scrawled on the tab. Inside, savings statements, old scholarship letters, and the trust account my grandfather had opened for me when I was 12. It had been intended for college, then grad school. After that, it was supposed to become mine outright. Except the balance was near zero. "You okay?" Daniel asked. I didn't answer. I stared at the line item that broke me: a transfer dated 2019, 5 figures withdrawn, labeled reallocation to joint account. "What joint account?" I whispered. There was no detail. No second name. Just the reallocation. Followed by 2 more similar transfers spaced 18 months apart. "I think she's been draining it," I said. Slowly. Long enough that I'd never notice. We called Olivia the next morning. Daniel's older sister, calm, meticulous, a corporate lawyer who specialized in financial misuse. She joined the call from her office, bun-tight blazer sharper than most of my knives. I explained everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Did you ever sign a power of attorney?" "Yes. When I was 19. Was it time limited?" "I don't know. I didn't read it carefully." She nodded slowly. "Then it's likely she still has some access, especially if it wasn't formally revoked." My chest tightened. "Can she do all this legally?" "She can't impersonate you. That's identity fraud. But the trust, if she had access and you didn't revoke it, she could argue implied consent." "Implied consent? Like signing your own erasure?" "I want to revoke it now," I said. "I'll send the forms." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Daniel busied himself in the kitchen pretending to need water, but I could feel his attention on me. I opened another browser tab. This time I searched old emails. One from Eleanor caught my eye, dated during my final semester at Penn. Subject line, quick signature, darling. The body was one line, just a routine update to the financial sign when you can. Love you. There was an attachment. I never remembered opening it. My phone buzzed. Tara, the last person I expected to hear from at this hour. A single text preview lit the screen. "I found something. You're not going to like it." I didn't wear the dress they chose for me. I wore the one I picked for war. It was pale ivory, not white. Clean lines. No embellishment. The kind of dress people remembered not because it sparkled, but because it didn't need to. A sheath of silk with a neckline like a quiet dare. I stood on the small pedestal staring into the mirror, and for a moment I didn't see someone preparing for a wedding. I saw someone walking into fire and daring it to touch her. The bridal shop was designed like a museum. Everything whispered opulence. Velvet curtains, glass shelves, pale lighting that softened every reflection. A flute of champagne sat on the side table beside me, untouched. I'd brought Tara along, but she was waiting outside just in case things got difficult. The manager, a woman named Elise, circled me with silent reverence. "It's modern. Understated. Very you." I nodded. "That's the idea." She stepped away to retrieve another set of heels when the bell above the entrance chimed, and in she walked. Sienna, draped in a floral wrap dress that hugged all the right places, sunglasses perched atop her head even though we were indoors. Eleanor trailed behind all soft coos and fake surprise. Oh, darling, we didn't think you'd be here this early. My stomach didn't sink. It calcified. Sienna's eyes slid over me and the dress. Her lips curved. Well, she said, aren't you? Classic. She walked slowly around the pedestal like a lion circling meat. Isn't this a bit plain for a dual celebration? I mean, you'll be next to me. You'll want to stand out a little, right? I'm not trying to compete. Of course not, she said sweetly. That would be unwise. Eleanor clapped her hands lightly. Now, girls, let's not turn this into a runway rivalry. Claire, have you thought about trying that blush-toned satin we saw last week? It would pair so beautifully with Sienna's ensemble. I glanced at the pedestal mirror again. The woman staring back didn't look like someone who took suggestions. I like this one, I said simply. Sienna moved to the table and poured herself champagne. To sisterhood, she said, lifting the glass. She sipped once, then reached for another flute. Claire, you're not drinking. Come on, it's a celebration. I took the glass just to keep her from pushing further. Sienna turned with a flick of her wrist and the contents of her flute launched toward me like a missile. The splash hit dead center. Dark red bled into the silk like a wound. Oh my God, she gasped too loudly. I'm so sorry. Elise rushed forward with towels and 1,000 apologies. Eleanor was already shaking her head. Wine and silk. They never forgive each other. I stepped down from the pedestal, slowly staring at the blotch on the fabric. It looked like a mistake, but it wasn't. I'd seen Sienna aim before on the tennis court in old family videos, in the way she always managed to throw insults just to the left of plausible deniability. She was surgical. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. You know, Sienna said, swirling what little was left in her glass, there's a gown in the back that looks almost like mine. Maybe now's the time to try it. Eleanor smiled too fast. Oh yes, Elise didn't. We see that blush one with the sweetheart neckline. Such a perfect match. A perfect match. Two sisters. One stage, one celebration. One spotlight. And one of us never meant to survive it. I looked down at the dress again, ruined. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Instead, I folded my arms slowly and said, "You're right. This dress doesn't belong to me anymore." Elise looked up, startled. "We can try to salvage." "No," I said. "Let it go." Eleanor moved toward me, hand outstretched, probably expecting a hug or some moment of theatrical reconciliation. I stepped past her and walked out. Outside, the air was sharp with spring wind and distant car horns. Tara stood against the shop window, brows raised. "Well?" she asked. I pulled out my phone. My hands didn't shake. I typed 2 words and hit send. Activate Plan B. They left breadcrumbs, and I'm finally hungry enough to follow them. The living room had become a war room. The wine glasses were gone, replaced with black coffee and water bottles. Our laptops cast dull glows over documents scattered like puzzle pieces on the dining table. Every light in the apartment was off, except the one above us, low yellow and buzzing faintly like it knew secrets it wasn't ready to share. Daniel sat across from me, his eyes trained on the monitor. Olivia's voice buzzed through the speakerphone, calm and sharp-edged. "You said you signed a power of attorney at 19? I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "My mother said it was just in case she needed to pick up my prescriptions while I was at school." I didn't ask questions. "Well, that power is still active." Daniel looked up, brow furrowing. What I said. "She never filed a revocation. Legally, she can still act on your behalf. It's highly unethical and there are limits. But if a vendor doesn't verify identity, she has cover." I leaned back in my chair, heart not racing this time, just compressing. "How do we undo it?" I asked. "We'll file a formal revocation first thing in the morning." But Claire listened to me. Olivia's tone dropped. This doesn't just go away because you take back your name. She's built something using it. And if we're going to dismantle it carefully, you can't tip her off. I glanced at the file folder Daniel had just opened. Good. Because I have no intention of alerting her. The metadata Daniel had been collecting was beginning to sprawl across his screen. Timestamps, login locations, file names. Each entry was a fingerprint, and none of them were mine. I logged into one of the old joint accounts, he said. The one from when you were still in grad school. Look at this. He turned the screen. The statement displayed a series of transfers, $1, $200 here, $2,800 there. Each labeled Family Support or Medical Fund S. S is Sienna, I said flatly. Likely. But then look at this one. He scrolled to a wire transfer dated 2 months ago. Amount 7,440. Memo floral vendor deposit. Vow renewal. My eyes narrowed. I never authorized that. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew the handwriting wasn't mine because it was digital. Because someone had been using the access they were never supposed to have. I opened my email, typed rosewood, then florals. No hits. Tara's message popped up instead. Subject, they think you're asleep. The attachment was a scanned document floral invoice. Bride Sienna Madison Brooks. Payment method, Claire Madison. Signed. Again. The signature looked almost perfect. Almost. But my actual signature tilted left. This one leaned right. Olivia's voice broke the silence. Claire, have you ever seen this? Daniel had forwarded the document to her. No, I said. She sighed. I think it's time we look into hidden assets. Hidden accounts set up in your name. Used by someone else. Usually controlled by a third-party spouse-parent business manager. It happens more often than you think. Daniel opened another browser window. Let me try something. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He cross-referenced old tax ID numbers from Claire's scholarship days, paired them with recent credit checks Olivia had pulled. A few minutes later, he turned the screen. There it was. A checking account active with a balance of $58,204. Owner Claire Madison. Address on file, Eleanor's. I stared at it. Not in shock. In confirmation. It's been used for boutique furniture, Daniel murmured. Designer clothes, 2 installments to Rosewood events, all within the last 6 months. They built a ghost life in my name, I whispered. Olivia's voice was quiet now. We can go to the authorities. But only once we gather everything. I want a clean sequence, dates, names, amounts, forged documents. A trail no one can deny. I looked at the screen again. This wasn't just about the wedding. It never had been. It was about control. About assuming I wouldn't notice because I'd never asked to be looked at, let alone protected. Well, I was looking now. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the city blinked, unaware, uncaring. But I saw it with new eyes. This wasn't my mother's world anymore. It was mine. And I intended to reclaim it. I turned back to Daniel. I'm going to let them think I don't know. And that I'll still show up. In my family, we lock skeletons in closets. But this one came in a red folder courier delivered. The folder was thick, worn at the corners, and wrapped in a rubber band, like it had been waiting for decades to be opened. Tara handed it to me like a weapon, carefully with 2 hands, and a look that said, "You're going to want to sit down." Rain licked the tall windows behind my desk. The library was nearly empty. Finals week was over. Students had either disappeared into dorms or fled campus altogether. The silence was almost comforting until it wasn't. Olivia was already seated, her heels crossed neatly under the chair opposite mine, a black umbrella dripping at her feet. It was the first time we'd met in person. She looked exactly as she sounded over the phone, composed, efficient, and sharper than anyone wanted to admit. Tara lingered a moment, eyes scanning the room, then nodded to Olivia and left us alone. I took a breath and opened the folder. At first glance, it looked like a stack of ordinary documents. Letterhead, signatures, legalese. Then I saw his name, Walter A. Madison. Last will and testament. Filed 1997. My grandfather. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years. He'd died when I was in middle school quietly in his sleep after a long and dignified battle with heart failure. He'd been the only person in the family who treated me like more than a background character. He used to call me the quiet thunderstorm. Because you'll never see her coming, he told Eleanor once over Sunday lunch. But she'll shake the walls when she arrives. Olivia pulled a few pages from the folder, scanning. This is the original will. Your grandfather set up a trust in your name. You were to inherit the majority at age 30. I'm 31, I said. Yes, she replied calmly, which means this should have come to you last year. I looked up. What happened to it? She flipped a few more pages and held one up. This is the dissolution request. Filed in 2018, merged into a general use family emergency account. I leaned in. The handwriting was unmistakable, looped cursive, lavender ink. Eleanor. There it was. The petition. Signed with flourish, countersigned by a secondary trustee, someone I didn't recognize, and rubber-stamped approved with no indication I had ever been informed. Did she have the authority to do this? I asked. Olivia was already shaking her head. Only if you were legally incapacitated. Or if you had signed a release of claim. I see neither. She used the power of attorney, she used access. She used assumptions. And she used you. A knot started in my chest tight, pressing not panic, not anger, but that eerie stillness that comes when grief turns to clarity. I flipped through the papers again. Dates, approvals, bank notices. All the signs were there, hiding in plain sight. Olivia pushed a final document across the table toward me. A new authorization form. This will open a case to investigate trust misappropriation. It could take months, maybe years, but we'll lock everything down. Once it's filed, the financials become public record. I looked down at the line for my signature. I thought I'd cry. I thought my hands would tremble. But they didn't. I was done asking for the truth. Now I was demanding it. I picked up the pen and signed. No flourish, no hesitation, just ink solid and permanent. Olivia slid the paper back into the folder and tucked it into her bag with the kind of reverence you'd use for an ancient manuscript. As she zipped it closed, she looked up and said, "Once we file this, there's no going back." They built a stage for a performance. I built a back door. The air in Rosewood Manor was thick with florals and falseness. Eleanor floated from room to room like she was starring in a lifestyle special, offering input on centerpiece density and aisle symmetry. Sienna trailed behind her in a white silk robe that whispered privilege with every step, complaining that the photographers weren't catching her good side. I stood near the back of the rehearsal hall, nodding on cue pen poised over a checklist I didn't care about. It was all theater now. Ornate, over budget, and blindingly desperate. Daniel stood near the French doors, scrolling through his phone, waiting for my signal. We hadn't spoken aloud since stepping into Rosewood today. We didn't need to. I was on board. Smiling. Compliant. The responsible one. Again. And no one had the slightest idea that I was building an exit plan beneath their feet. Earlier that morning, I had stood barefoot on the worn wood floors of Lakewood Chapel. No silk, no glitter, no flashbulbs. Just Daniel, Olivia, and Tara, our war room allies, now turned wedding witnesses. The air had smelled like pine and something older, like quiet promises made in simpler times. Lakewood wasn't on any of my family's radar. It wasn't even listed in the wedding planner's spreadsheet Eleanor obsessively shared. That was the point. As Sienna demanded another makeup trial and Eleanor negotiated the placement of imported orchids, I slipped away for a call. Final confirmation, Olivia said, her voice clipped but pleased. The chapel is reserved. Private access. No external staff. The officiant's already briefed. I glanced down at the planner in my lap. Rosewood 4:00 p.m. Lakewood 4:00 p.m. My phone buzzed again. Tara. Tara hair and dress team confirmed. I'll meet you at the chapel at 2:30. No detours. Everything was in place. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need approval. I just needed space to write my own ending. Claire Eleanor's voice cut through the rehearsal hall like a blade. Darling, come give your opinion on the dessert tower. I crossed the room, slowly, expression neutral. The table was absurd. 3 tiers, gold accents, chocolate mousse molded into roses. Sienna picked up a spoon and sampled a bite theatrically. I hope your vows are better than this ganache, she said with a smirk. You are still writing them, right? I met her eyes. I've already written them. She blinked, then shrugged. Well, try not to cry too early. It'll ruin the photos. I smiled. Good tip. Later that night, in the quiet of our apartment, I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open. The email was already drafted. Subject: see you at Rosewood. 4 p.m. body. Can't wait to celebrate with all of you. The big day is finally here. No one would question it. They'd be too busy being seen. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop and turned to Daniel, who had been watching from the couch. You sure he asked? I nodded. They'll have the stage. But we'll have the marriage. He reached for my hand and squeezed. The next morning, I stood in front of a mirror wearing a dress I'd chosen for me. Simple, elegant, unruined. There was no red wine this time, no matching gown with sienna, no sabotage stitched into the hem. Tara arrived with the bouquet white peonies and wild eucalyptus. Clean, real, just like this day. She smirked as she handed it over. They won't see you coming. Because they won't see you at all. They threw a rehearsal dinner for a wedding I wasn't attending. The irony was marinated in champagne. Through the lens of my phone, the Rosewood ballroom shimmered in high definition. Sienna had posted a reel set to an orchestral cover of some trendy pop song, panning over crystal flutes, floating candles, and a white piano no one could play. The caption: one more sleep until the double day of love. Sister goals. Anniversary meets. I scrolled past the filtered smiles and into the silence of my own apartment. The room was lit only by the amber glow of a paper lantern. Daniel sat beside me, legs stretched out, a carton of Thai food balanced on his thigh. We hadn't spoken in 5 minutes, and it was perfect. On the TV, muted, was an old noir film. Smoke curled. A femme fatale narrowed her eyes, and I quietly signed the last page of the form Olivia had couriered over the official closure of the shared account my mother had been dipping into for nearly a decade. Done, I said. Daniel looked over chopsticks midair. All of it. All of it. He smiled, set down his food, and reached into the drawer beside him. A small velvet box. Simple. Not staged. We do this our way, he said, opening it. No one else gets a say. The ring was exactly what I wanted: thin band, quiet sparkle, no family heirloom, no invisible strings. I slid it on, still holding a pen in the other hand. At that very moment, somewhere across town, my name was being toasted by people who didn't know they'd already lost me. Rosewood Manor had outdone itself. My mother had hired a string quartet flown in lobster from Maine and lined the walkways with photos of Sienna and Thomas's greatest moments. One wall featured Claire and Daniel shots, professional, airbrushed, all posed. The speeches began. James, my father, offered a tired toast about family unity and the joy of legacy. He looked down as he said it. Eleanor beamed. This has been a long journey, and Claire, sweet girl, you've always put family first. You're our rock. I could almost hear the clinking glasses. Sienna took the mic next. She was radiant, of course, wearing white, of course, hair-curled, eyes glossy. Sharing this day with my baby sister is so special. Not everyone can share the spotlight gracefully, but Claire's never been one to make things about herself. laughter, applause, the kind of applause you hear at a funeral when no one knows what else to say. Meanwhile, I sat cross-legged on the floor in a sweatshirt sipping ginger tea. Tara texted. Tara USB planted. Booth unlocked. Message set for 4:15 p.m. They're gonna choke on their cake. I smiled. The USB was loaded with a short video one Eleanor herself had left on my voicemail years ago, laughing. We can always make it look like it was her idea. That's the trick. Overlaid would be documentation of the trust fund siphoning the power of attorney trail, and a screenshot of the final account closure. Everything timed, everything traceable. I tapped the screen to check the wedding license once more. Still valid, still unfiled. In 24 hours, it would be signed in Lakewood, far from candlelit rehearsal toasts and staged affection. Daniel leaned over. Still hungry. Starving, I said. He passed me a spring roll and we ate while the woman on the noir film smoked her last cigarette. Then my phone lit up. New voicemail, Claire Madison. I stared at it for a beat too long, then hit play. Claire, she said in her smoothest voice, the one she used with bankers and real estate agents. I know you don't love big events, but tomorrow's going to be magical. You'll make us proud. Proud. It echoed in the room like a bad note. I deleted the message, then turned to Daniel and whispered, Tomorrow. They'll finally see what I've really been building. It was the morning of my wedding. My name was everywhere, and I was exactly nowhere. It was printed on signage outside Rosewood Manor in gold cursive script looped with fake florals and optimism. It was etched on custom cocktail napkins, monogrammed menus, even projected on a wall, with a swirling animation that spelled Claire and Daniel, a day to remember. And yet I was in a sundress, bare-faced, standing in a sun-dappled courtyard 2 miles away, watching dew slide off the petals of a daisy I picked on the way in. Lakewood Chapel was small. Whitewashed wood vines curling up the trellis, the scent of eucalyptus candles and rain-soaked stone. The pews held only 30 people, each one hand-picked. People who didn't care about curated centerpieces or designer timelines. People who knew us. Daniel adjusted his tie. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes were the only affirmation I needed. At Rosewood, the show had already started. According to the fake schedule we sent, hair and makeup were supposed to begin at 8:00. Claire's gown to be delivered by 9:00. Claire to arrive, be pampered, posed, paraded. Claire to smile, say the lines, take the photos, nod through the vows. But Claire had vanished. Back at the estate, a young MC flipped through his cue cards, visibly sweating. Eleanor paced near the grand mirror in the bridal suite, phone glued to her hand, eyes darting. Sienna rolled her eyes and said too loudly, She's probably having a dramatic moment. It's Claire, we'll wait. They didn't know they weren't waiting for a delay. They were waiting for a ghost. Meanwhile, at Lakewood, Tara adjusted the tripod. Olivia handed us our rings. I held Daniel's hand not to calm him, but to anchor myself to this reality. This true ceremony. No audience, no expectations, just vows we wrote ourselves, and the quiet power of intentional presence. I never asked you to rescue me, I said aloud, my voice, clear, unshaking. But you waited anyway. You stood still until I remembered how to move. Daniel's lips curled slightly. I didn't want to marry a name. I wanted to marry a person. You. We signed the marriage license at a wooden table that wobbled slightly. No photographers, no champagne tower. Just truth, and it felt cleaner than any polished ballroom. As we stepped outside for a few portraits captured by Tara, who'd insisted on just a few, for you. Not for them, she whispered, uploading now. What caption? I asked. She grinned. Just a heart emoji and the date. Simple. Honest. Within 30 seconds, the photo appeared online. Claire and Daniel under a birch tree, forehead to forehead, laughing like the world had no claws. Within 2 minutes, it was shared. By the 5-minute mark, Eleanor had received 43 messages. Where is Claire? Why is she at a different venue? What's going on? This isn't at Rosewood, is it? The whispers began in the crowd at Rosewood. Guests started checking their phones under tables. The MC tried to pivot, asking Sienna and Thomas to say a few words. The sound system hummed with awkward pauses. Plates clinked. Confusion bloomed like smoke. And still Claire, this Claire, sat in the back of Daniel's car, veil off, shoes kicked off, one hand resting on her husband's knee. I raised my glass of ginger ale. No toast. Just a breath. And silence. Until the phone lit up. Incoming call. Sienna. Daniel looked at me. I stared at the screen, then flicked it to silent, watching the call dim like a dying ember. They had wanted a performance. I gave them a vanishing act. They waited for a bride who had already said her vows, just not to them. The sun filtered through the arched windows of Rosewood Manor's grand hall, casting soft golden hues across rows of white chairs lined with fresh orchids. The string quartet played softly in the background, hitting the same polished chords for the 4th time as the clock struck 4:07. Sienna stood near the altar, visibly irritated. She adjusted the bodice of her champagne-colored gown and hissed through clenched teeth. She's doing this for attention, like always. Eleanor paced near the curtained hallway, eyes locked on her phone screen. Dozens of missed calls. Her lips moved without sound, reading each message with growing confusion, then concern, then disbelief. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Murmurs began to stir like a low tide. A few had already seen the video, Claire in a sundress hand in hand, with Daniel smiling in natural light beneath a tree, vows exchanged in quiet sincerity. Was that? Today, she's already married. Wait, this isn't staged. The MC adjusted his tie and stepped up to the microphone. His voice cracked slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are just waiting on a small delay. In the meantime, feel free to help yourselves to more champagne. A few guests clapped politely. Others checked their phones again. James remained seated near the aisle. His hands rested on his lap, folded neatly. His expression was unreadable, neither surprised nor calm. Just still, as though he'd expected this all along. Sienna's cheeks flushed deep pink. She pulled Eleanor aside, raising her voice just enough for nearby guests to hear. You said she was in the car? She was, Eleanor snapped. I sent the driver at 10. She must have changed plans. Changed plans. It's her wedding. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Then it began. The speakers crackled once. A soft click echoed through the room. A few heads turned. The quartet stopped mid-phrase. Then Claire's voice. It was calm, crisp. Played from the ceiling like some holy broadcast. If you're hearing this, I've chosen a different path. Gasps scattered like broken glass. I want to thank you for coming truly. I know many of you came here expecting to celebrate love. And in a way, you still are just not the version you were told. A pause. Soft instrumental music played beneath her voice, now gently underscoring the next words. Sometimes family forgets that love without consent is control, and obligation without respect is exploitation. Eleanor turned pale. Turn it off. Turn it off. She stormed toward the control booth, only to find the USB locked into the panel, glued and wired to a timer. A blinking green light pulsed with every beat. To my mother, my sister, and those who chose silence when they could have spoken, this is not revenge. This is reclamation. The screen behind the altar flickered on. A photo of Claire and Daniel appeared, smiling barefoot under the birch tree. Married. Sienna's jaw dropped. She looked out across the crowd, many now holding phones, recording the moment, texting updates in real time. Is this a joke? She muttered. And then the final line. I'm not sorry for disappearing. I'm just sorry it took me this long. Silence. Real silence. No music, no buzz, just the stunned breathing of an audience who had witnessed a wedding unravel without a single scream. Eleanor's knees buckled. She clutched the edge of a chair, eyes wide with something between fury and disbelief. A waiter rushed to steady her, but it was too late. She fainted, collapsing to the floor in slow motion like a queen without a crown. Sienna let out a guttural noise, a hybrid of rage and panic. Her bouquet slammed into the front row of empty chairs, petals exploding like a final insult. And James, he stood quietly, smoothed the front of his suit, and walked out the side door without a word. He never looked back. Eleanor faints. Sienna throws her bouquet into the chairs. James walks away. It took them 3 hours to realize the real damage wasn't emotional, it was financial. By 9:00 a.m. Monday morning, the courthouse halls smelled like burnt coffee and irony. Claire sat beside Olivia in a quiet office with frosted windows and heavy oak furniture. A single document lay on the polished desk, its title bold and dry, Motion to Reopen Trust Allocation, number 472B. Olivia tapped her pen twice before signing. "That's the last one," she said, sliding the folder toward Claire. "Now we wait for the audit and the emergency injunction." Claire didn't smile. Not because she wasn't satisfied, but because the satisfaction had matured into something colder. Quieter. "It's not revenge," Claire murmured. "It's repair." Outside, the sky was overcast again. Philadelphia always had a way of matching moods. Meanwhile, at Eleanor's house, the silence was louder than the thunderstorm scheduled for that evening. Sienna paced barefoot across the marble floor of the foyer, still in her designer loungewear makeup half removed from the disaster at Rosewood. Her phone buzzed again, an unfamiliar number. She answered only to hear a clipped female voice. "Ms. Thomas, this is Brenda Rausch from the Office of Financial Review. We're contacting you regarding fraudulent vendor payments associated with a wedding event at Rosewood Manor." Sienna hung up. Then another message arrived, and another. Her inbox was now filled with forwarded invoices, one of which totaled $14,300 for floral installations. Under the client field, it read, "Claire Madison." Back in Olivia's office, Claire slid a final paper across the desk, this one simpler. "Revocation of power of attorney." "I signed this when I was 19, she whispered. "I thought it was just a form to let my mom manage my college loans." Olivia nodded. "Most victims do. And that's what you were. Until now." Daniel leaned against the window, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken much that morning, just watched Claire as if she were transforming in real time. Maybe she was. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You okay?" Claire didn't look up from the paper. "I'm not the same girl who needed permission to say no," she replied. "And I don't need to explain myself anymore." Elsewhere, the gears of justice turned without drama, just documentation. By noon, the IRS had received formal notification of questionable withdrawals from a frozen account labeled Madison Family Emergency Fund. The account's signatories included one, Eleanor Madison. That same hour, a courier knocked on Sienna's door with a subpoena to produce financial records. She didn't answer. She just watched him from the upstairs landing, heart beating in her throat. At 1:42 p.m., Claire received an email. "Subject trust ruling finalized body. The court has approved full audit. Distribution of funds frozen pending review. Trust reassigned to sole beneficiary Claire Madison." There was no exclamation point in her reaction, no celebratory champagne, just a slow exhale and a private victory. As she closed the laptop, her phone buzzed. One name lit up the screen, Mom. Claire stared at it for a full ring. Then another. Her thumb hovered over the green circle. She could already imagine the voice on the other end, tearful or angry, apologetic or manipulative, a shapeshifter depending on the script needed. She let it ring a third time. And then she pressed block. Eleanor calls Claire. Claire lets it ring, then blocks the number. They always said I'd ruin the family. Turns out I was just the mirror. When I was 15, I was told not to air dirty laundry. I'd complained gently about how Sienna had crashed my laptop and erased a month's worth of schoolwork. I remember Eleanor's exact words. No one likes a girl who makes a fuss. Family stays quiet. And so I learned. Until now. Now the dirty laundry was all over the internet, pressed, folded, captioned, and shared by wedding blogs and social media vultures who had no idea they were carrying gasoline to a fire. The leaked wedding video had been reposted at least 7 times before I even got out of bed that morning. Claire Madison's real wedding. Hashtag Karsha Vow Hijack. Sister swap. Bride block. They were being clever. I was being free. I made coffee. I fed the cat. I didn't check my voicemail. Daniel brought in the mail and set it next to my stack of exams. I was grading midterms on female literary agency in 19th century fiction. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Outside spring was taking its time. The trees were green, but the wind still bit. I closed the window just as my phone lit up again. Tara had already warned me Sienna's PR firm is in damage control mode. They're trying to spin it like you're working through some things and the ceremony will be rescheduled. Rescheduled. As if I'd been running late to my own erasure. Daniel said nothing, just handed me a muffin. He knew better than to offer comfort. I didn't want comfort. I wanted stillness. Peace. That thing they swore I was ruining. On page 3 of the midterm stack, a student had underlined a quote, "To lose one's voice is to become the echo of someone else's will." I sat with that line for a while. Longer than I should have. Daniel sat across from me on the floor. We didn't use the dining table anymore. Too formal. Too structured. He was scrolling his phone slowly. "Eleanor's been removed from the Women's Business Advisory Board," he said almost casually. "Voluntarily, they're calling it a leave of absence, which usually means not voluntary." I nodded. And Sienna, he tilted the screen so I could see. Her brand's Instagram had been set to private. The comment section on her last post and ad for luxury makeup had been limited. I didn't have to read the replies to know what they said. Still, a small part of me wondered if this was what winning felt like. It didn't. Not really. I kept grading. I was halfway through a paragraph on Jane Eyre's refusal to marry Rochester when the doorbell buzzed. Daniel answered. A delivery handwritten envelope, no return address. My name in ink. I slid it open. Inside was a single note card. No signature. Just words written in blocky, awkward handwriting. "Thank you. You gave me the courage to cut them off too." I read it 3 times. Each time slower than the last. It wasn't just a thank you. It was a recognition. A shared wound. Someone else, maybe a cousin, maybe a niece, had watched everything unfold and seen, not scandal, but salvation. I pinned the card to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sloth. Fitting. That night, I took a walk alone. Daniel didn't ask where I was going. I think he knew. Some roads you walk by yourself even when you're no longer lonely. The sky was purple when I got home. Purple like bruises healing. I opened the mailbox out of habit. Bills. Flyers. And one letter. Handwritten. Familiar cursive. The name on the return address stopped me cold. James. I hadn't heard from my father since the day I walked out of Rosewood Manor. I turned the envelope over in my hands. My fingers shook slightly, not from fear, not from anger, from memory. The memory of a man who never spoke up, who stood at the edges of every explosion and swept up the ashes later. I didn't open the letter. Not yet. I tucked it into my coat pocket and walked back inside, letting the door close behind me without a sound. The letter smelled like cologne and guilt. My father's words came decades too late. It had been sitting on my counter all night. I hadn't touched it after I got home. Just set it next to the tea kettle and left it there unopened, like it might expire or dissolve in its own cowardice. This morning, I made jasmine tea. I pulled the blinds just enough to let the light in, turned on a soft playlist Debussy mostly, and sat across from the envelope as if it were an overdue guest. Then I opened it. James Madison's handwriting hadn't changed. Still looping careful like someone afraid of being misunderstood, but even more afraid of saying the wrong thing. I read the salutation: Claire, if you're reading this, thank you. Thank you. I laughed quietly. No sound, just breath. The rest unfolded slowly like a wound he'd been hiding even from himself. He wrote about silence, about watching Eleanor rewrite family history while he nodded along, about not knowing how to stop her and being raised in a time when men didn't interfere in domestic matters. Domestic. That was how he labeled it. Decades of manipulation, quiet betrayals, twisted priorities, all filed under domestic matters. There were half apologies nestled between sentences that blamed timing, culture, generation. I should have listened when you were 12 and tried to tell me Sienna forged your signature on the art contest form. I should have asked more questions when Eleanor dipped into your college fund. I should have said something when I saw the wedding invoice. I should have. I should have. I should have. A lifetime of verbs undone by passive voice. He wrote about watching me walk out of Rosewood Manor and realizing I'd finally done what he never could left. Not the room. The role. I didn't cry. I just drank my tea and kept reading, letting the heat soothe the places his words couldn't reach. There were small memories woven in like a man trying to remind me he once mattered. A story about teaching me to tie my shoes. A quiet afternoon in a park with ice cream melting down my wrist. I believed him. I remembered. But memory is not redemption. It's just proof you existed. I stood up halfway through and opened the window. Spring had finally arrived in full, and the city air carried cut grass car exhaust and something like freedom. The letter ended with, I won't ask you to forgive us. Just know I see you now. I always did. I just looked away. I folded the pages once, then again. Then I reached into the drawer for a matchbook we hadn't used in months. The flame caught fast. I held the letter above the sink until it was nothing but floating ash and the faint smell of something expensive dying. Not in anger, in finality. Later that afternoon, I took out my own pen. Not because I had something grand to say, just a line. I hope you find peace. I already have. I folded it, slid it into a plain envelope with no return address, and walked to the mailbox. My footsteps didn't echo. The wind didn't lift my hair dramatically. It was just normal. I opened the box, set the letter inside, and closed the little metal door. He might never respond. I think I prefer it that way. She leaves the letter in her mailbox knowing he may never respond. I didn't get the wedding I was promised. I got the one I deserved. The garden outside Lakewood Chapel smelled like lavender warm bread and late May. It had rained the night before, so the grass was damp beneath the folding chairs, and the air was thick with the kind of green that only comes after something has been washed clean. Daniel was already pouring orange juice into mismatched glassware. Tara was adjusting table linens that didn't match the flowers. Olivia arrived 10 minutes late holding a foil-covered pie she baked herself. Someone brought jazz music on a tiny speaker, and someone else brought muffins that were already half gone before I finished setting napkins. This wasn't a reception. It wasn't a redo. It was something else. We called it a celebration of truth, but that wasn't written anywhere. No signs, no name cards, no hashtags. Just people who saw us, loved us, and stayed when the noise cleared. I wore a sundress this time, not for war, but for warmth. Daniel wore the same shirt from our real wedding. Tara said it still had the faintest lipstick stain from the day I hugged him too fast, too hard in front of the chapel. He said he'd never wash it. There was a table near the back with a small leather-bound photo album. Tara had filled it with stills from our ceremony. Some were blurry, some were overexposed. All of them were real. No poses, no choreography. Just us laughing like two people who'd finally escaped the narrative someone else wrote for them. Guests brought notes instead of gifts. Some were funny inside jokes from college doodles of champagne flutes and cats in veils. Others were serious. A colleague from the university wrote, "Seeing you stand in your truth gave me the courage to leave my own silence." Daniel and I sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket reading each one. Every note was like a stitch sewing something whole out of the scraps. Later, I stepped aside with Olivia, who was holding a cup of lukewarm coffee like it contained state secrets. "I want to set something up," I told her. "A trust. Small at first. For women getting out of financial abuse. Not shelters. Not charity. Just options." She didn't ask why. She just nodded. "We'll start with the leftover funds from your reactivated trust. There's more than enough." I exhaled like I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. For years. Daniel clinked his fork gently against his glass and everyone turned. I stood before they could toast. "I just want to say something," I said, voice steady. "They told me family is everything, but they forgot to mention that we get to define what that means. So," I raised my glass, "to the family we choose." A chorus of glass followed. Tara wiped her eyes. Olivia raised her cup like a gavel. Someone yelled, "Hear, hear." Daniel just smiled because he knew that was the most I'd ever say in front of this many people. The brunch wound down slowly like something that didn't want to end, but didn't need to linger. People packed up their Tupperware and leftovers not with awkwardness, but with the ease of having shared something rare. I was helping gather napkins when my phone buzzed. One new email. No sender I recognized. Subject line: "A woman named Claire changed my life." I stared at the screen for a moment. Not because I didn't believe it, but because, for the first time in a long time, I did. Claire receives an email. The subject: "A woman named Claire changed my life."